So it's Thanks, Sam. Um, so welcome to the session with Marco Pasqua. Marco and I have known each other for, I actually probably shouldn't have said that, but I think it's about 6 or 8 years, somewhere in there. We had the incredible good fortune of being on a board together for the Active Living Alliance for Canadians with a Disability. So that's how we got to know each other. Marco is an incredible speaker and advocate for disability, and we've done several projects together over the last few years, and really grateful to call him one of our collaborators with Inclusion Incorporated, but have been pulling him into some work with OneAbility over the last little bit as well. And this is one of the pieces that we pulled him into, because we know that this group and team is constantly looking at sort of how you can move some of your initiatives forward, and know that that can be challenging. And Marco has extensive experience in this area. So I'm not going to do much more of an intro than that, other than Marco has also a really beautiful family, Karen and Stella, and Karen and Marco have just launched a new consulting firm. So I'm sure he'll tell us a little bit more about that as well. But yeah, we'll pass it over to you, Marco, and thank you so much for joining us today, and just really grateful to have so many incredible humans in this room.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Andrea. And if people would just give me 2 seconds, I'm going to switch over to my funky studio setup that I have here with regards to how I screen share. So just give me a moment. One second, sorry, I had to actually say start the virtual camera. So hopefully that will kick into gear here. And this is the problem when you transition from one setup to another.
Sorry, we made you undo that. We didn't mean for it to be hard to start it.
Oh no, that's okay. That's totally fine. I just have to hit this, and then there you go. That's okay. I really appreciate it, and we'll kick this off very shortly here. There we go, and then you don't want to see the side of me. There we are. Okay, great. So thanks so much, everybody. And as I said, I'm actually really excited to be here, simply because this is something that is important to me, not just because I'm a person with a disability and I've been, kind of focusing on accessibility and disability-related topics for the majority of my career, but it feels as though advocacy has been something that I've been kind of introduced to almost from birth. And that will make sense in a second here. So essentially today, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about authenticity through your advocacy work, and why storytelling and sharing your why is so important. Now, you're going to learn a little bit more about my why, and I'm a huge believer in Simon Sinek's starting with why, because that's the core of any message, is starting with your why as opposed to what you do. But when it comes to me, in order to fully understand my why, you actually have to learn who I am as a little bit as a person. So I want to share a quote, start off with a quote that my speaking mentor told me when I was first starting out in the business. And that really stuck with me. And I learned it was actually from Maya Angelou. And that is, people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. So when you're approaching your advocacy work, I want you to think about how you're making people feel within the messaging that you're putting out there in the community, because that message and how you make them feel is really the moment where things truly resonate. It's how people get on board with what it is you're trying to convey and convince them to join you with in terms of collaborative efforts and building community-based programs, recreation programs, whatever it is that you happen to be building out. If you want your advocacy work to be successful, you have to make people feel something. Now, in order for you to fully understand what I'm telling you in terms of storytelling is, as I said, you're starting with your why. So why are you sharing that message to people? Why is it so important in the work that you do? Who are you, And what are you telling people about yourself and your organization, both in person and online? Both of these things have to be consistent. I feel like the reason why authenticity is so important is many of us often will be a completely different person online as we are in person. And I think it's the wrong approach. Many people use social media as kind of a way to protect themselves or as a filter for them to be whoever they want to be. And I'm more of a proponent of being consistent. So the same person that you're hearing from today presenting to you is the exact same person that you would meet in person. And I'm sure that anyone who knows me on the call could attest to that. So that leads to the question, who the heck am I? Who is Marco? What is at the core of who I am? And the reason why I'm sharing my who first is because I actually think that it is who I am that led me to discover my why. And you'll learn about that in a second. So who am I? So my name is Marco Pasqua, and I was born with cerebral palsy. When I was born, I was 3 months premature, and I only weighed about 2 pounds, 10 ounces. So that's roughly about the size of 2 butter packages. And, doctors said that I was actually so small that I could fit inside my dad's shirt pocket. Now, I don't think that he tried to do that because that would be weird. But he did say that I was that small. But in all seriousness, doctors told my parents that I would be lucky to even survive the night. In fact, they even told my mom to not bother to sign the birth certificate because I was probably going to die. Now, I want you to think that the impact that probably had on my parents. Now, something you may not know is I actually was born on July 4th, the US's Independence Day. So for me, I think it was ingrained in me to always prove my independence. Even though I'm not American, there's just something about being born on July 4th and being a Cancer that I just, maybe that's exactly why I was born premature, is that this was the time for me to pop out and get started in the world. So I wasn't really discouraged, and my parents, they were devastated to hear the news that I was probably, that I could die, but they were still such positive influences, and they were still so hopeful about what the future could hold for me. Now, this led to many different hospital visits. I spent from age 0 to essentially 13. So the first 13 years of my life in hospitals, undergoing various surgeries, because it was determined to my parents when I wasn't crawling properly after about 18 months, I wasn't crawling or even attempting to walk. And that's when my parents would later find out that I had cerebral palsy. So they didn't know it at the time of my birth. They just knew that I was premature. And they didn't know what complications that would have, but they ended up learning that as a result, it ended up meaning that I would have cerebral palsy and I would have to undergo many, many different surgeries. So 13 surgeries from age 0 to 13. And what happens when you're in a hospital bed for the first 13 years of your life, most of the time throughout your adolescence? Well, I learned that obviously my legs don't work as well as other people. And so I was a manual wheelchair user. But one of the benefits actually to this being my story that I spent a lot of time around adults, especially professional adults, mostly doctors. And this enabled me to learn the gift of the gab, to learn how to talk to people, so the rest of my body wasn't functioning the way I would like it to, but my voice worked out just fine. And so it was thanks to this that I really learned to speak up for myself and to really talk to people and really engage with people. And I think somewhere along the line, it lit a fire in me to know that regardless of any physical restrictions I might have, that I was never limited by the things that I could say or do or be creative of. Now, I wouldn't know it at the time, but this would really be the sparking of my journey through advocacy and self-work and really promoting things that were important to me. Now, this led me to my real introduction to advocacy work through the charitable world. Now, as somebody with a disability, born with a disability, I was exposed to a lot of great programs growing up. One of which was Easter Seals Camp Squamish. And that camp literally changed my life forever. Now, as an 8-year-old, I had the opportunity to go on Easter Seals charity that they would do every single year, which used to air on CBC. And it was hosted by some great celebrities and various things like this. But the year when I was 8 years old where they had an opportunity to actually feature me on camera and talk about the importance of what it was like to be introduced to their summer camp, where I didn't have to feel like anything except a child, not a child with a disability, but just a child. And when I got the opportunity to say a few words on stage, again, I didn't know it, but at the time, this would change my life forever. Now, I'm going to share a clip with you from that very moment, because I was lucky enough to get video footage of that exact moment where my life changed. And I'm actually being interviewed by an incredible friend and mentor of mine who recently passed away in April. His name is Red Robinson. Now, if you don't know Red's story, a long story short, he's the individual as a radio DJ who convinced them to play rock and roll for the first time in Vancouver back in the 50s and 60s. He was the first to interview the Beatles in Canada. He was the first to interview Elvis Presley and Buddy Holly. And this is the guy who believed in me as a speaker from the get-go. So take a look at the clip.
Your name's Marco, right?
Yeah.
How are you, Marco?
Good. I was on last year's Timmy's Telethon.
Did you enjoy it?
Yeah.
He's an old hand at this.
You're an old hand. What's it say here about you love art? Do you do drawings and things?
Oh yeah. Last time I drew a picture of my dad doing soccer because that's one of my dad's favorite sports.
How about you? Do you like it too?
Yeah, I used to go to his games, but now I don't. Yeah, and another favorite place that I like to go is Camp Squamish. And if people said to Buddy that I can't go to Camp Squamish again, and so if people keep on sending each year, then we can keep on going into Camp Squamish and having a good time.
I couldn't put it better, Marco.
I'd like to say, if you could show this to the people on my check, how much...
Sure, my pleasure. My pleasure, Marco. This is the little check. Hold that end there, son. And I'll hold the other end. There we go. There he is. He's holding it up. It says $100, huh? Thank you, Marco.
Thank you, Marco.
Marco, you know what I think? Marco, I think next year we'll get you to do all of the little things they call promotions or commercials for Timmy's. Would you like to do that?
Yeah.
Big hand for Marco here.
Now,
Thank you.
As you can see in that clip, I always kind of had the gift for the gab. And in that moment, Red said to me, Marco, how would you like to come back and do that thing that we call promotions for Timmy's next year? Would you like that? And I thought, I said, yeah, kind of nonchalantly, not really even knowing what he was asking of me to do. I didn't know it at the time, but this was going to be something that would change my life forever because Red stuck true to his word. And the very next year, I was asked to be the official ambassador for the Timmy's Christmas Telethon, which started a whirlwind for me as a 9 turning 10-year-old of doing radio interviews and going on meeting with reporters to be featured in newspapers and being flown to Haida Gwaii to do local telethons and regional things. And it literally changed my life forever because I realized that with all the things that we see in the media, even as an 8-year-old and turning 9 and 10, that you can actually use the media for good. You can use the media to create stories that are impactful and that change people's lives forever. I couldn't be more grateful because that was something that I don't think I ever would have pursued if it wasn't for guys like Red out there believing in me. But of course, you do these things, and I was the ambassador that year and everything went really well. But then reality sets in and you say to yourself, well, I don't know, that was just a one-off thing, and you're not going to necessarily be a beautiful poster boy for the rest of your life with rosy cheeks and that kind of thing. So I said, well, how else can I make an impact in the community? How else can I go out there and learn how to collaborate with other people? And luckily for me, I was introduced to team sport at an early age. As you heard in that clip, I talked a lot about my dad being a soccer player. My dad was such a good soccer player that he was almost recruited for Team Italy. I'm only first generation Canadian. My dad came here from Italy, and he kind of put those dreams on the back burner in order to start his family in Canada. But I wanted to show my dad, even though I was born with cerebral palsy and I couldn't play soccer traditionally like he did, that I could get involved in other sports. So I got involved in everything from wheelchair basketball to wheelchair track and field, horseback riding, swimming, and weightlifting. And I competed in the BC Summer and Winter Games for athletes with a disability and earned over 22 gold, 10 silver, and 2 bronze medals in those sports. I guess I had a point to prove about my independence, as I said earlier. Now, learning these skills in terms of combining that with advocacy and understanding the importance of physical literacy really changed my life. And as you heard Andrea say in my intro, this led me to get involved in organizations like the Active Living Alliance for Canadians with Disabilities. And if you can see my image on the screen right now, there's an image in the bottom left corner of me and the man in motion himself, Mr. Rick Hansen. That was me meeting Rick for one of the first times when I was 14 years old playing wheelchair basketball. Now, again, I didn't know it at the time, but Rick would have an incredible impact on my life later on in life. But as far as my collaboration and team sports skills went, I knew that this was going to help me one day to acquire a job and to land a job out there doing something that I loved. Now, one of the things you wouldn't necessarily know about me is I've always had a passion for technology and computers and things like this. So I thought to myself, what could I do that would combine my love for kind of advocating for myself, advocating for a disability, that kind of thing, the collaboration efforts in sports and everything like that. And I actually ended up pursuing a career in video game design and got a job at one of the biggest game studios in the world, Electronic Arts. Now, it's an interesting thing here. You can see with this image, it says it's not just a bus stop, it's a pathway to meaningful employment. And let me tell you, that certainly was the case for this particular opportunity, because like I said, I was going to be able to inject myself as now a young adult into the workforce and really have to prove myself and what I was capable of in terms of advocacy and collaboration. So let me explain. So when I got this job at Electronic Arts, especially right out the back of my education, I was so pumped, in fact, that I even memorized where all of the kind of key landmarks were in terms of where I had to be let off at the bus. And so I remember on my very first day, I remembered exactly what stop I had to get off at, and I rang the bell to let the driver know that a person with a disability was going to be getting off. And I started to unbuckle the restraints that were holding my chair down. And I knew I was in the right place because I saw other colleagues of mine wearing EA lanyards around their neck. So as one after the other, they all started to line up at the front of the bus, and one by one, they started to get off at the stop I knew I had to get off. And finally it got to me, and I was expecting the driver was just going to lower the ramp and let me out. But before I could say anything, as the last ambulatory person gets off the bus, he sees me there, but he still closes the door and he begins to drive off. Now, thinking this was some sort of a mistake, I look at the driver and say, driver, I think you're making a mistake. You see, I work here too. I need to be let off. But I wasn't expecting what he was going to say next. He said, well, I can't do that. I said, well, what do you mean you can't do that? He says, well, do you see that bus stop sign there? Do you see how it's missing the accessible decal? He actually used the word handicap. I can't stand that word, so I'm going to use accessible. I said, sure. He says, well, that means that the city has determined that this bus stop isn't safe for me to let you off at. And that means that the next bus stop I am able to let you off at is where that symbol is presented. Well, I didn't know this at that time, but that symbol wouldn't be presented for another 3 blocks. So I want you to imagine something. I live in Metro Vancouver. This location's in Burnaby, and it rains here a lot. So now I'm being presented with new information that not only am I going to have to wheel up a massive hill to get to the top of the EA campus, and it was up a steep hill, so, as such that I would actually have to have the arms of Rick Hansen just to get up that hill. But now I was being told that I would have to wheel 3 blocks back just to get to the start of where the rest of my colleagues were let off at. But I kind of accepted this as my reality. And so day after day, week after week, month after month, my colleagues would get let off at one stop and I get let off 3 blocks later. Rinse, repeat, rinse, repeat. And the worst thing about this is that I was then going to perpetuate additional stigmas about people with disabilities. So not only would this mean that, well, I'd have to potentially catch an earlier bus because it was going to take me longer, but say I had an important meeting and I had a nice work blazer on and I can't hold an umbrella and wheel my chair at the same time. So imagine what it's like if it's downpouring and then there's maybe some mud or some dirt on the ground. And by the time I get to the front entrance, my sleeves are covered in mud. My hair is all disheveled and I certainly don't look ready for work, but I've got a meeting with an important manager in 5 minutes. So now I have to explain to him why my sleeves are wet, why I don't look prepared. And I didn't want to perpetuate this stigma anymore. And I just thought that this was going to be my reality for the remainder of the time that I was there. Until one day I met a driver by the name of Chris, and that's where everything changed. You see, Chris and I, we started to get to know each other in a meaningful way. We actually introduced each other, and he was my bus driver for several weeks at this time. And finally, Chris spoke up and he said something. He said to me, Marco, I got to ask you a question, man. I said, sure. He says, well, you see, I know that I'm letting off your colleagues at one stop, and then you're waiting until 3 blocks later and getting off, and I don't really know why that's the case. I guess Chris never got the memo. So I sort of puffed my chest and said, well, you see that bus stop sign there? You see how it's missing the accessible decal? Well, that means that the city has determined that this bus stop isn't safe for you to let me off at. But I wasn't expecting what Chris was going to say next. He said to me, well, I think that that's stupid. Now, although I agreed with Chris and said, well, I agree, that is stupid, but no offense, what are we going to do about it? I'm a lower level employee that recently started at this company, and no offense to you, you're just a bus driver. So what are we going to do about it? But he said to me, no, I think there is something that we can do about that. And with that, he went and talked to his manager, who then talked to the city planner, who then talked to the technician. And they determined that, yeah, sure, when this bus stop was initially installed, sure, there may have been uneven pavement or maybe some thorn bushes or things that were dangerous nearby that would prevent you from lowering a ramp. But today, there was absolutely no reason why this bus stop couldn't be converted to an accessible stop. Now, this was really impactful for me simply because I couldn't believe that he could have this conversation. And I tell you what, within 2 weeks of Chris starting this conversation, they determined that absolutely there was no reason why they couldn't convert this, and they permanently changed this stop forever to be accessible. Now, not only would this benefit me while I was working at EA, but this would benefit everyone in our community simply because of one person deciding that there was an inequity and they could speak up and use their voice and change a ripple effect that would actually create something that would impact people for the rest of their lives. Now, at the end of this story, I want you to think about something here. I want you to think about the key takeaways of this story. Now, Chris, he didn't owe me anything. He didn't have to bring up anything to do with, supporting me, but he saw something different and he decided to say something regardless of his position in the company. So what are some takeaways that you can extract from a story like this that would be similar to stories within your organization or recreational facility or group? Now, policies can be changed, and it's not just from senior leaders. You can speak up and use your voice and make that change that you want to see. Advocating for your needs can be incredibly rewarding. And I want to focus on the word advocating for a second. You know, there's a difference between advocacy work and activism, right? So when you're out there trying to convey a message or a story to people, I don't want you to wear an activist hat. I want you to wear your advocacy hat because there's a major difference, right? Many activists, they have good intention, but the problem is a lot of them, when they approach a situation, they're approaching it purely with anger and not necessarily always the right solution, but just you're the one who created the problem and you're the one that needs to fix it. Whereas when Chris talked to me, he realized that there was an inequity there. And he said, no, I'm going to work knowing that a patron who uses my bus is having challenges, and we can really go out there and make an impact and make a difference if I raise my voice and do it together. He got people on board. He got people on his side. Instead of saying, this is a real issue, you need to fix it, he said, well, why can't we take a look at adjusting this bus stop? There's no reason why it can't be adjusted now, right? And so it was very rewarding. It changed it for me. That removing access barriers is easier than people think. right? It's just the changing of a sign. At this point, that environment was ready to go, right? It was ready to go. It just needed the A-OK to be converted to one of those accessible stops. That it's important to address stigmas around disability. You know, this is not something that I've always wanted to shine a light on. Sure, I'm a person with a disability, but I didn't want to be that to be the focal point of who I was. So I didn't want to stir the pot and be somebody that was going to create an issue just because I am the person with the disability. I wanted to show people that, you know, I can be a great employee and I'm starting out and I can do my thing, but it is important to remove those stigmas because like I said, if I arrive with a dirty blazer on, it's not because I'm ill prepared. It's because of inequities or things that were on in my environment that were creating true barriers. And so to address that and to bring that up to management and make that change, we were able to change this bus stop, right? That innovations come in all shapes and sizes. Sometimes it's as simple as just changing one sign. And that's all you need to do to innovate and change and create a community where everyone can feel included. Now, you know what the cool thing about all these key takeaways is that all of these points can be summarized into 3 to 5 minute presentations. So every single one of the points that I just listed above, they could be the title for your next presentation. If this was your story and you wanted to share and get people on board with donating to a cause that you're doing or a new program that you want to create and you're looking for funding options, how can you take a story like I just did and actually extrapolate that into 3 to 5 minute presentation, an elevator pitch, or even a blog post? Right? Every single one of these things can address a point and can actually meet the criteria of specific grants out there. It's just all in the ways in which you position the story. And Mary Lane and others on the call will tell you, they've heard me tell this story countless times. I've told it hundreds and hundreds of times. And every single time I tell it, I try to tailor a little bit differently so that it makes sense for the audience of which I'm speaking to, right? And that's exactly what you can do with the stories that you have within your organization, your advocacy work, and how you're presenting yourself and your organization. Now that leads to my work today. Now let me explain something to you here, actually, because it's not going to make sense to you that I had this career in the video game industry and then all of a sudden now I'm out here doing speaking. Well, what ended up happening was between the 2008 and 2010 recession, I actually lost my job, and along with 1,800 people also at Electronic Arts. And I remember being completely devastated. I called my wife up at the time to tell her that I lost my job, and I totally wasn't expecting her reaction. She had seen me grind so hard in the game industry at that point for about 5 years. And she saw that it was kind of eating away at my soul. So when I told her that I lost my job, I was not expecting for her to be jumping for joy on the other end of the phone. And that's exactly what she did. And I said, why are you so excited? I told you I lost my job. And she told me, because I don't think that was what you were meant to do in this world. I think you were meant to light a fire in people and change people's lives in different ways and be a true storyteller. And so with her encouragement and guidance, that's where I got to my work today and what I do as an accessibility consultant. So I thought back to that little young 8-year-old to 10-year-old boy who was out there on stage doing this work. And I thought to myself, wait a minute, with my ability to convey a message to people, with my ability to collaborate with other people like I did with Chris and like I learned in team sport, and with the various things that I learned, maybe there is something out there that I could do it. But I'm going to admit something to you. I didn't want to talk about accessibility or disability related issues when I first started out. And you may see in this collage of images on the screen right now, there's various images on the screen. And in the bottom left, there's again a photo with me and the man in motion, Mr. Rick Hansen. And again, another one with Rick and I later on in life as well. And this is because Rick became a very influential figure in my life, not just a poster on my screen. Let me explain. So when I was starting my business as a speaker, I had an opportunity to give a TEDx presentation on the benefits of using technology like video games to change people's lives and to innovate for people with disabilities. So that was kind of a message around accessibility. And in the audience of that TEDx presentation, there was a person who said, oh my goodness, that was such a compelling TEDx. Would you be willing to talk to one of our clients that we're working with who's building an online community for accessibility? And I said, well, who's your client? And they told me, our client is Rick Hansen. Now, I was beside myself when I was told this because Rick is literally, as I said, a guy that I had as a poster on my wall as a little boy. I listened to the Man in Motion song, St. Elmo's Fire, almost on repeat because he inspired me so much. And now I was being told that I had an opportunity to work alongside somebody that I looked up to my entire life. So, of course, I said yes. And it was really Rick who said, Marco, you're doing great work on speaking about leadership and connecting with people and doing all those types of things. But I think it would be a disservice to the community if you didn't talk about accessibility work. And it's thanks to Rick's encouragement that I actually became designated in the Rick Hansen Foundation's Accessibility Certification Program and really started to combine my knowledge of advocacy work, my knowledge of charities, and now a knowledge of accessibility to really be a powerhouse in the space of changing people's perspectives on what it means to create communities that are inclusive. All because Rick believed in me, all because Red believed in me, right? And so when you're thinking of promotions, I want you to think of things that can create a wow factor for people. Let me hide myself for a second. So if you can see the image on the screen here, yes, that is me. This is not photoshopped. That is me dangling from a 20-story building in my wheelchair. You can see the cars below me. And you would think, my goodness, is Marco insane right now? But let me tell you something about promoting yourself in an authentic way. Easter Seals, that organization I mentioned off the top, who did the camp for me, Camp Squamish, that changed my life. They have a fundraiser every year called the Easter Seals Drop Zone, where you have an opportunity to rappel off of a 20-story building in order to raise money for children with disabilities to go to camp. And of course, I immediately said yes. Now, the organizer said to me, Marco, you could, just do the rappel outside of your chair. You have enough leg movement in your legs due to your CP that you could rappel standard. And I said, well, where is the fun in that? I also found out that the climbing team that was going to help with our harnesses was the same team that helped the Chilean miners back when they got stuck. So I felt like I was in good hands. So I asked them, could I do this event in my wheelchair? And they said, yeah, I mean, I guess we could do that. We could harness you up that way. And I thought, what a better way to raise awareness about what it is that we're doing. Think about it. If you were driving down a busy downtown street and you looked up and saw some guy in a wheelchair dangling from a 20-story building, you would think, what the heck is going on? I need to find out what this is right now. And I was right. People started coming in droves, a massive crowd surrounded around the building. They didn't really know what was going on. And this was my way of being able to tell them about what it is that we were doing. And I was able to, in the first year doing this, raise $8,000 with a team of other rappellers. We were called Team Inspirational, adrenaline rush and inspirational. I thought it was kind of neat. And yes, I am dressed up as a superhero with spandex and long socks on to create even more of a message there. I did it the second year and we raised another $5,000. I did it a third year and it was my final year, as my wife would tell me, because she could not deal with any more years of me deciding to dangle myself off the side of a building. So she said, third time's the charm, please stop doing this. You're doing it for the right cause, but it makes me nervous as heck every single time you do it. But think about that, right? I was able to help raise over $18,000 for kids to go to summer camp simply because I was willing to do this event and do it in a way where I could create images and stories that would create that wow factor. So when you're doing your programs or your campaigns, think of how you can do something that's authentic to you that creates that real wow factor with the work that you're doing, right? But I also want you to think about being authentic and adding a little bit of a personal touch. You heard in my introduction that I'm a family man now. I've got a young 2-year-old daughter named Stella, and she means the absolute world to me and my wife. And we actually take her on disability walkthroughs with us, and she's listed on our website as a junior associate. And the reason we do that is we actually want to show building designers and architects that when we're doing walkthroughs, this is not just about people with disabilities. For accessibility, that it impacts every single person in the community, especially mothers and fathers who have to use a stroller as well, whether you have a disability or not. So Stella is so much a part of my story, and I'm willing to get vulnerable with people. You heard that from the top. I'm willing to share the story of me almost dying at birth. But I also love love to travel. I love recreational travel. I love to go on cruises with my wife. We go to the Caribbean islands all the time. And I wanted to really show the locals that we could change the perspective of what they think of people with disabilities, because many people with disabilities in the Caribbean are never seen in public because the families are taught to be ashamed of disability. Whereas we want to flip the script on that. So my wife and I will specifically come off the cruise ship and I'll do papa wheelies off their curbs. And I got to tell you, that is like popping off of a moat, because their curbs are crazy. If you've ever been to the Caribbean, they're insane. So showing them that a guy with a disability who uses a wheelchair can be an active member of society is really important, because you're changing people's perspectives. Again, you're creating that ripple effect. So when you're developing your campaigns, your stories, your advocacy work, what are you willing to do to get vulnerable? You don't have to get as vulnerable as I did. You don't have to share as personal of stories, but the more personal you get, the more you get to the heart, to the center of what makes each and every one of us human beings. And I think that that's so important. It's what's helped to kind of drive the success in the launch of my business and all the other ventures that I've done in my life. So I want you to develop your niche. Now, in business, as an entrepreneur, a USP is called a unique selling proposition. But from the aspect of storytelling, I want to change this up a little bit to unique story positioning, right? So how can you uniquely position your stories in order to make a difference? And you might think, well, Marco, I don't have as many stories as you do. Let me tell you, you actually have more stories about your organizations, your programs, and the people that they impact than you think. So I want to show you something that I created with my speaker mentor, a guy by the name of Dale Elliott. Now, Dale told me, never ever think that you're stumped or that you don't have enough to create stories. So he encouraged me to create Post-it notes that have different timelines of key moments in my life that made an impact or made a difference. Now, I'm such a nerd, as you heard, being in the game industry and computers, that I made a timeline of events in my life using an Excel document with drop downs and everything like that. You don't have to go to this level, but I am willing to share a template of this drop down with Andrea and with OneAbility after today's presentation so that you can use it as a template. But here's some examples I'm willing to share with you all from this document. Now, this document outlines key moments that occurred in my life, key milestones in my life from the day I was born in 1985 all the way up to 2011, 2012, when I launched my business for the first time. Right. And so you can see here, I have a column that says year the event occurred. What was the outcome of that event? Any comments or analogies that I have? And again, how did it make me feel or the people involved in the story feel? To go back to Maya Angelou, right? So being born in 1985, July 4th, 3 months premature. You heard me tell that story. And although the outcome was a little bit negative, as you can see here, I said, I've always been told I have no patience. And even as a newborn, I started early, right? So again, this is me kind of collecting my thoughts in terms of that story about the butter packages and being born. Now, again, I was too young to express sadness, but my parents were sad. They were uncertain. They had a little bit of fear, but they also had hope. Right. And as we go down the timeline here, you see the different stories and moments that impacted my life. I can guarantee you, if you think about the inception of your organization and all the different stories of impact that you've created, you can create a timeline of events from either the beginning of when your organization started to today, or whatever chunk of time you choose to have. And all of these stories can be converted into keynote presentations if you really needed to, or at least a very compelling white paper and or grant proposal write-up, right? So think about the different ways in which we can tell these stories. So now, really, how does this tie into who I am and my why and my niche? Right? So my why, my niche is to help people understand universal design using everyday stories. And this is an incredible picture of a gentleman on the right-hand side who's actually at a bar at a lowered countertop, being able to enjoy his drink like a human being. And why I say like a human being is because I can't tell you the number of times as a wheelchair user that I've gone to a bar and it's only bar stool seating. And all of my friends are sitting up on bar stools, this much higher than me. And I'm sitting there, have to use a bar stool in order as a tabletop in order to eat at the same level as my friends. And I got to tell you, that's like playing bar stool roulette, because you have no idea who was previously sitting on that stool. And now I'm using this as a table. So that is degrading. So an opportunity like this, I can see why this gentleman is blown away at the accessibility that was considered here, right? He was able to enjoy a drink with his friends together because access was considered. It created a moment of dignity and respect and created meaningful access. Now you might say, what the heck is meaningful access? Well, meaningful access to me and my family is simply that the way in which I'm able to access a program and service is the same as everyone else. So you call up a place and they say, I have an accessible entrance. But is that entrance the same entrance as everyone else uses? Or is that entrance at the back of the building in a loading dock area next to a dumpster with a bunch of needles, and I have to wait out in the rain until somebody opens that door? I use that as a very specific example because that's the experiences that I've had to do. I've had to knock on a door and they say, oh, the accessible entrance is around the back. And then I'm being shown an impromptu kitchen tour that I'm not supposed to see as a patron simply because it's the only way to get to my seat. So when we think about meaningful access, it's about creating opportunities where everyone is equal, right? And so a friend and family member, you may not necessarily have a disability, but you may work with patrons or people in your program who do have a disability. So sometimes it's not your story to share, but it's the story of others to share as well, right? So consider that, and obviously get the permission of those people before you share those stories. So the different ways you can share these stories, your advocacy programs, right? Blog posts, radio and TV interviews, social media, and community meetups. And all of these examples that I've just shared, many of them actually don't cost anything at all. Blog posts you can do yourself, radio and TV interviews. If you have a really cool story about a new community center opening up that's universally accessible, or a brand new program you're launching, a lot of the times reporters want stories like this. So I've used that to my advantage, and I'll let them know in advance and say, by the way, I'm going to be rappelling off the top of a building. Does that sound interesting to you? Absolutely. Where can we be? How can we get there? Now I've got their attention. What am I going to do with that attention, right? Social media posts, community meetups. There may be local community meetups or groups that you can share what your organization is doing and let them know and attract new members to come to your program, right? Again, most of these are free, or sometimes they cost $5 to enter. So you might be wondering, how do you measure this impact? What makes an advocacy campaign successful, right? Outside of just the authenticity, right? So I've kind of narrowed it down to 5 success indicators. One is you've changed an impact on policies, right? So just like I did with Chris, we advocated together and we were able to change something, change that bus stop that impacted something and change the community, not just for me, but for everyone else that used it. We helped to raise awareness. Look at the ways in which I was able to raise awareness through the rappelling program and the drop zone. And you can kind of look at this and see how much more social media shares did you get? What kind of organic media coverage did you get that you didn't have to pay for? These are other metrics that you can track. The mobilization of support. So who signed your petition? Who made donations? Who attended your event? And since you did this new thing, this new advocacy campaign, has that increased? Has that increased since the last time that you did it? Right? Did you change people's behaviors towards the way they approach you or the cause that you're representing, right? Have they adopted new habits or even changed their attitudes or stigmas towards you or your cause? And then lastly, you want to get feedback from your stakeholders, right? So you want to get feedback from the people who are really involved, those policymakers, community leaders, individuals that are affected by your advocacy work. And they're going to help you to elevate the effectiveness of this because they're going to give you true blue, honest feedback that you can use to implement and change your program going forward, right? So that's really, really important to consider that. So expanding your network, how are ways in which you can do this? Well, I've kind of already covered this, but again, promoting your stories and your lived experience, in my case, through social media. Sell them on your services and programs without selling them. Establish a need, right? This is where that authenticity piece comes in, because you want them to come to you and say, actually, we need your program. In fact, I will write a letter of support in your grant proposal because I know how much we need your program in our community. Right? Reach out to those stakeholders, those social influencers, and let them know you're interested in collaborating. Do you know how many people I've reached out to who have podcasts or different shows and said, hey, listen, I'm doing something really cool. Do you want to talk about it on your show? And in fact, there's a website called matchmaker.fm that you can create a free profile for that enables you to be featured as a guest on podcasts. And podcast hosts can also have a profile on there, and they can find you and find out what your programs are about. And they can actually email you and say, hey, we'd actually like for you to be on our show. Would you like to be on our show? So it's a really great one. That's matchmaker.fm. But also, as I mentioned earlier, know your boundaries. Don't do anything that would make you feel like you crossed a line. Obviously, if you're utilizing individuals with lived experience or stakeholders, get their permission, but also, again, you don't have to do it in the ways in which I do things, right? You have to do it in a way which is authentic to you. And that's the most important part about authenticity. And as I said earlier, most of the time appearing on these podcasts or these YouTube channels is absolutely free. So what are you doing? Get out there and start spreading your message and spreading the word. So in closing, some grants to look out for, which may be specific to the work at which you're doing. So of course, some of you may have heard of the Via Sport grant, and that's approximately $2 million in sports-related grant programs each year to reduce barriers and ensure quality sport experiences. So that's a big one that I would highly recommend if you haven't utilized it yet. Here's another one that's a little bit outside the box. This is the BC Arts Council. So they have a grant that is various grants actually that support community arts. Maybe you have a dance program at your recreation facility. Maybe you support individuals who are deaf, the disability community at large. You're involved in festivals or even the Indigenous community, right? So if you have these programs or media arts programs, this is another avenue that you may want to check out. And then lastly, there's the community gaming grants through the government of British Columbia. This is an incredible one. $140 million annually for not-for-profit organizations throughout BC to support the delivery of ongoing programs. And I did some research before I came into today's talk, and their sports programs application is actually open from March 1st to May 31st this year. So you have a full month from today if you want to look into this community grant program and see if you're applicable or eligible for some of this funding. And then the last one I didn't include on here is actually the Jumpstart program. Now, I know Andrea is very familiar with the Jumpstart program through Canadian Tire, but that's another one. And actually the city of Surrey, where I live, they've utilized this program to create universally designed playgrounds and parks for people with disabilities to be able to integrate themselves with their families. So when I go to parks that have been impacted by this program, the Jumpstart program, it means that I can literally, in my wheelchair, wheel up a ramp and take my daughter down a slide. And I got to tell you, it brings a tear to my eye every time I think I can do that, because I didn't think that that was going to be possible for me in my wheelchair, right? But programs like this, it creates parks and recreation pieces that really change people's lives. So thank you so much, everyone. That's the end of my talk. I think I really hit it right on the line of the 40 minutes, and I hope that we have some time here to answer any questions that you might have. So thanks very much.